Kefalonia, the largest and arguably the most beautiful of the Ionian Islands. My brother Alexandros and I were born there, in its capital, the city of Agostoli. A couple of years ago I had the idea of traveling to Agostoli in a special way. Finally, in September 2016, we were ready to go. On the day of departure, everything started well. The sun was shining, it was dry and warm. My brother Alexandros, his friend Tambet from Estonia, and myself, we met in our hometown Gundelfingen near Freiburg. We prepared our bikes and did some test rides. Alexandros and Tambet already had some experience in traveling by bicycle. But for me, it was a first. My luggage weighed at least 20 kilograms. Too much? Seeing Tambet's carbon bike and the little luggage he I had some doubts. After a fine and rich pasta dinner and a couple hours of sleep, it was time, midnight. The adventure was about to begin. We left Gundelfingen and headed south to Freiburg and further. During my training rides, I climbed the Bungsberg, the highest hill of Schleswig-Holstein. Now I was ready for the real mountains. In the middle of the night, only the stars in our headlights were shining, we climbed the Turner in the Black Forest. While Tambet had already arrived at the peak safely, I was still struggling with my way up. Driving zigzag with short breaks and the help of Alexandros, I finally managed to reach the top. It was a great feeling, having successfully climbed my first mountain pass. Across the first border in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, we had a break in the backdrop of the famous Rhine Falls. We strengthened ourselves for the remaining kilometers of this, our longest stage. We rode up the Rhine towards Lake Constance. For September, it was still unusually warm. Having arrived in Constance, Alexandros and I enjoyed the sun, while for our Estonian friend, it was already too hot. He had no idea though how hot it was about to become. Switzerland is a paradise for cyclists. There are well-supported bicycle lanes and great system of road signs, so navigation is very easy. In the afternoon, we met with Stefan, a friend of my brother's who came from Munich to accompany us on our way through the Alps. The four of us headed on towards the mountains. After some time on the bike, two beer benches at a resting place invited us to take some rest, an offer we simply couldn't refuse. Our journey went on through Lustenau and Feldkirch towards Bludenz. However, there was a heavy storm coming up, so we decided to cancel the stage after 260 kilometers and 16 hours on our bikes. We were lucky. A local taxi driver was nice enough to make some space for our bikes in the back of his transporter, so that we were able to arrive at our hotel in time. It was the only hotel where we booked some rooms in advance. Crossing the Alps, what a challenge. After a rich breakfast, we prepared our bikes and sometime later we headed for the Arlberg Pass. Cycling uphill isn't exactly my strongest suit, and above all, I had too much luggage. Although I knew that it was going to be painful, I was looking forward to the ride. I was able to keep up for the first kilometers, however, I knew that this wouldn't stay that way. Obviously, it was going to be a warm day again. Still clouds were building up, and we were expecting rain. The mountain was steep and challenging. Struggling, I slowly made my way up, meter by meter.
Wir haben schon 631 Höhenmeter. Die Gewitterwolken ziehen schon auf. Den zweiten Pass schaffen wir wahrscheinlich nicht. So, die letzten 100 Höhenmeter sind wir am Arlbergpass.
However, I finally reached the top. We enjoyed the sun that was burning even stronger in 1,800 meters. The following descent was extremely speedy. We raced down the mountain with top speeds of over 50 kilometers per hour. Fantastic, especially after the tormenting ascent before. Sometime later we ignored a roadblock. We didn't know of the reason then, and so we had the whole road for ourselves. Then, however, we could see why the road was closed. A mudslide caused by the thunderstorm the day before had produced serious damage. So, looking back, we now knew that it had been the right decision to cancel our ride in Bludenz. In Landeck, we turned south and cycled along the Inn River until we reached Martina, our final destination in Switzerland. By now, I had learned that everyone drives uphill at his own pace, so I climbed up the road, taking serpentine at a time. After a short, fast descent, we reached Nauders. We had to drive past every single coffee and restaurant, a curious kind of traffic routing. Right after we had left Nauders, a strong storm set in. We had to take a lengthy break as lightnings were striking everywhere around us. However, the sight of Lake Reschen and the half-submerged bell tower of Graun compensated for our delay. Tambet chose to ride past the lake on its western shore. We, however, cycled on the eastern side. Still, we arrived at the southern end at the same time. After only 2 days of traveling together, we already made quite a good team. We found a lovely farm that it not only provided us with a place to sleep, but also with a fabulous 3-course dinner, Bella Italia, and so I had finally accomplished my crossing the Alps. During the day's morning hours, we had to realize that summer was drawing to an end. However, that was supposed to change again during the course of the day. After 3 days, we were slightly lagging behind our schedule, but still it was possible to reach our final destination in 16 days. Tambet taught me that merino wool can not only be used against cold, but is also useful against heat. And a simple leaf is quite a good protection against a sunburned red nose. We took a nicely done cycle track down the valley towards Merano. I learned the technique of slipstreaming that day, the driving in the wind shadow of your companion. Kilometers were rushing past. We reached speeds of around 28 kilometers per hour, despite our heavily loaded bikes.
Einmal lachen. Mit Edge, wir sagen jetzt einmal, das ist die Edge. Und der Molfetas 2.
After a beautiful long serpentine descent, we reached Merano, where we took a breakfast break. We finally managed to have our first real Italian pizza. Although the road was steadily going downhill, we broke into a sweat as the thermometer showed 33 degrees Celsius by now. In Bolzano, Stefan left us. He took the train back to Munich while we three headed on to Trento. Slowly, some first physical problems emerged. My hands were already swollen after 2 days. Even changing gears became a painful process now. Was I about to reach my limits? As an immediate measure, Alexandros told me to take off my cycling gloves. Normally, I'm used to 4-star hotels. Now I was looking forward to my tent and sleeping bag. The first night on the campsite proved to be better than expected, surely due to the tiredness after 3 days of non-stop cycling. Today we were about to leave the Alps and the Alpine foothills for good and travel towards the North Italian plain. A picturesque road along the Brenta River led us to Borgo Valsugana, a medieval town where we took a break with fine coffee and some classic ham tea sandwiches. The narrow valley was wonderful to travel through. We were lucky with the routing. We had no idea what to expect of these cycling tracks when we had planned our trip. When we had passed Bassano del Grappa, we finally left the mountainous region and headed for Trieste. The thermometer showed over 32 degrees Celsius. There was no shade at all, and we were running out of water supplies. The local police couldn't help us. The clueless officers even sent us in the wrong direction. Luckily enough, we discovered a large supermarket. The employees were quite astonished when each of us left the store with 6 large bottles of water each. The country now was flat as a pancake, a good opportunity to make up some time in kilometers we had lost before. The other day, the Trento Wall, a steep passage right behind Trento, had caught us by surprise. This day, however, passed without any major events. Every day it was a thrill to find out when and where exactly we would reach the first 100 kilometers of each stage. The route was more beautiful than we expected. There were cycling tracks, so we didn't have to travel on the busy main roads. Having passed through Oderzo and after 190 kilometers on our bikes, we arrived in Portogruaro, where we spent the following night. Just like the famous city of Pisa, this town has also a leaning tower. Portogruaro obviously is a popular tourist place. We had no other choice but to take some rooms in a hotel on the town's outskirts, which proved to be a place of typical Italian standards. At least we were able to have dinner right there in the hotel, and Alexandros enjoyed his first watermelon. The sun was finally leaving her marks on our skins. We had achieved a small goal. We were back on our schedule. On the next day we were about to leave Italy. It wasn't exactly a great idea to buy white cycling jerseys. They had no zippers, and after 4 days, both shirts were so dirty that I didn't feel comfortable wearing them anymore. It so happened that there was a bicycle shop right next to the bakery where we had our breakfast, so I was able to buy a new shirt. Now that I was wearing a real jersey, we could make for Trieste. The route was pretty boring, so it paid off that I took along some small speakers. Listening to Greek reggae sounds of Locomondo distracted us from the dreary surroundings.
Rechts vor die.
On the border to Slovenia, we took our first major break that day. Alexandros couldn't wait to have his fresh rolls with Nutella. Istria is known to be a paradise for cyclists, and it sure is. We traveled towards Croatia on small, rarely frequented roads, abandoned railroads or even gravel roads. Just like the past days, storms were coming up during the afternoon. We could already hear the thunder roaring from afar. Apart from being daunted by the coming ascents, I also became increasingly afraid of lightning strikes. On the border to Croatia, we arguably experienced the most bizarre border crossing of our trip. The border official obviously had never before encountered an Estonian citizen in his whole life, let alone on a bike. Right after the border, we got into a heavy thunderstorm. I raced down the mountain with 60 kilometers an hour, caused by my fear of being struck by lightning and with nothing on my mind but let's get out of here. Shortly after that, we arrived at the Adriatic coast of northern Croatia. It felt like holidays when we entered the campsite and Tambet went for a first swim in the sea. It wasn't exactly a nice campsite, but after the excitement in Istria, I was happy to find a place to sleep at all. And after all, we had loads of calamari for dinner and had still made quite some progress on our journey. After a short, uneasy night's sleep with a lot of traffic noise, we departed for our next destination, the island of Krk. We passed through the lively city of Rijeka, with its impressive football stadium built right into the rocks on the sea. Rijeka surely is a beautiful and interesting city, but for cyclists it is right a mess. There are no cycle tracks and the streets are narrow and crowded. By then, we had established our daily routines. Get up in the morning, ride the first 30 kilometers, then take a break for breakfast. It was a nice coincidence that, on this day, we had our first break in a place called Bicycle Cafe. The Adriatic coast proved to be exactly as Alexandros told us before. A constant up and down, ascents and descents all along the way to Krk Bridge. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep up with Tambet and Alexandros again, which led to us splitting up. Tambet drove in front, while Alexandros and I followed some time later. We had planned to take the ferry to the island of Rab. Tambet had already boarded the ferry when it departed. Alexandros and I were 15 minutes late, so we had to wait for 3 hours to take the next ferry. We settled down in the harbor, and Alexandros had another one of his beloved Nutella rolls. Among the funniest incidents of our trip definitely is the encounter with an Austrian couple who spent their honeymoon on mountain bikes. After a short trip with the ferry, we reached the island of Rab, where we reunited with Tambet. He had no idea how far he had been in front of us, so he remained on the first ferry because he mistakenly expected us to get in on time. Originally, we wanted to continue our travels with a catamaran, but unfortunately, they don't allow bikes on these boats. What at first felt like a major setback actually turned out to be a stroke of luck. We had to take a water taxi that brought us all the way to the northern tip on the island of Pag. The ride into the sunset and the following journey through the night were among the highlights of the entire trip. We were fooling around, expecting to see dolphins alongside the boat. These guys would have made this already very romantic atmosphere perfect. However, they didn't turn up, but I guess that would have been too much really. With only 115 kilometers by bike, we still came a lot further than we thought, thanks to the boat trips. This time we all find a quiet campsite, quiet because most of the tourists had already left. Our plan to travel across the islands and, by that, avoid the traffic on the Adria Magistrale seemed to pay off. The first kilometers of the day were dominated by the bleak, plantless scenery and the heavy south wind working against us. It is fascinating. Every Croatian island has a different, unique landscape, and Pag is bleak, very bleak. Just like every day, we looked up to the sky. Hopefully, no rain again. Up to then, we were very lucky, not only concerning the weather. This was already the 7th day in a row. I had the feeling that I had become one with my heavy touring bike. Fortunately, there weren't any major ascent on this day. Nonetheless, the descents were all more beautiful. Near the village of Pag, we had our first break. By then, we got accustomed to our breakfast consisting of pizza and similar food. We had to provide ourselves with enough calories and energy. A stray cat begged our Estonian companion for some food, in vain.
One chocolate croissant.
When we headed for Zadar, we had to take the main road, a somewhat dangerous enterprise. You had to be careful all the time, as car drivers don't necessarily pay enough attention to bike travelers. In Zadar, Alexandros had taken his bike to a repair shop. He had some serious problems with the brakes. While we waited, Tambit took a little power nap on a park bench. I envy him for this gift. Alexandros had his brakes fixed, but sometime later his gear control started to have malfunctions. His bike was a professional traveling bicycle. We didn't expect this of all bikes to cause any problems, and we didn't even know yet what soon would follow. We decided to finish the stage in Šibenik. Tambit again drove in front. Alexandros and I followed on side and main roads. In order to make sure that we didn't arrive in the dark, Alexandros drove in front of me the whole way, thus allowing me to ride in his wind shadow. We advanced quite well and incidentally witnessed a Croatian wedding on the way. We met with Tambit on the outskirts of Šibenik and started looking for a place to sleep. Once again, we were lucky. The Mare hostel is truly worth a visit, with its nice and really helpful stuff, and the weather too cooperated again. It remained dry until we arrived. We had good reason to hope for the best for the rest of our journey. Šibenik is a beautiful city, obviously quite popular with tourists in the summer. Narrow alleys on various levels, interesting sights and countless cafes, bars and restaurants. There had been some rain during the night and it was already quite hot and humid early in the morning. Fortunately, we could do our laundry in the hostel, especially our jerseys, and overall we felt quite refreshed. We took the shortest route through the inland, an advice that was also provided by the hostel staff. There was another steep ascent on the way, however the view down on Trogir and Split compensated for the short strain. Racing downhill, we went back towards the coast. Even a lovely market on the way couldn't make us stop. In order to get to Split, you have traveled along the coast, passing 7 villages, old fortifications and castles. The port of Split is lively, full of tourists and a harbor for many cruise liners and ferries. Once again, we were lucky. After only a short break, we could board the ferry to Hvar. We enjoyed the passage. After all, it presented us with a rather long break. There were a lot of passengers on the ship, among them many bikers and rockers who were traveling to a biker rally in Hvar. By then, Alexandros had a nice tan, and even our northerner Tambet obviously got used to the sun. Having arrived on Hvar, the Croatian island presented itself in the best possible way. A brand new road and nearly no traffic at all, simply wonderful. On this day I had no problems with following Tambet on his gravel bike. Unfortunately, the problems with Alexandros' gear control reoccurred. He couldn't use half of his gears, so that he slightly fell behind. The last kilometers to Sukurai were one single speedy descent. Nevertheless, we missed the ferry back to the mainland. It wasn't that bad though, as Alexandros was able to get us an apartment for the night. Meanwhile, I began to stop worrying where we would sleep each night. Normally, I like to plan such things in advance, but slowly I got used to these spontaneous decisions. Again, the weather played its part. It stayed dry. From now on, we had traveled nearly another 1,000 kilometers to reach Kefalonia. But we had already successfully completed more than half of our journey. Although we were now continuously cycling for 8 days, it wasn't hard for us to mount our bikes in the morning. By now, we got used to the daily preparations and packing, so it didn't take very long anymore. My body, too, was now accustomed to the constant cycling. My pulse got lower on a daily basis. The training effect kicked in. I felt detoxicated and free, and that just felt damn good. We left the nice little apartment, went to the bakery for breakfast and waited for the ferry. The passage with the small ferry only took 20 minutes, still enough time for our breakfast. In the south of Croatia, there was no alternative to the Magistrale Adriatica. However, traffic wasn't as heavy as expected. There were a lot of caravans and mobile homes, many of them from Germany. Certainly, we had come across some of them before on our journey. Performance improved each day. Tambet and my brother praised my accomplishments, which motivated me even more. Never before had I been cycling at a stretch for such a long time. We crossed another country, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Finally, Alexandros emptied his glass of Nutella, having traveled with it for over 1,000 kilometers. We continued towards Dubrovnik. Before our journey, we were assured that Dubrovnik would be the only city we had to see. When we arrived there, we decided to take just a short break for some photos. It would have cost us too much time and effort. Looking down on the city, we got a picture of it, and that was enough for us. After all, we were on a cycling trip, not on a sightseeing tour. We decided to continue to Cavtat, the last Croatian coastal town on the border to Montenegro. Again, we had accomplished nearly another 150 kilometers and over 1,500 meters in ascent. Cavtat turned out to be quite busy, but anyway, we were able to find some reasonably priced accommodation with our bicycles nearby. Meanwhile, we had also developed a routine for the evenings. First it was my turn to have shower, then Alexandros and finally Tambet. Then we sat down for dinner, discussing the next day. After some chats with the family, we finally fell asleep, exhausted. Finally, a rainy day arrived. The first kilometers in Croatia were more or less dry, but after crossing the border to Montenegro, there was no holding back. The weather constantly changed from rain to sunshine and back every minute. We had no idea of what to expect in Montenegro. Still, we were looking forward to yet another new experience. The payment in euros was, of course, an advantage, no need for the inconvenience of changing money. Traveling past Herceg Novi, we headed for Kamenari. The landscape was impressive. The entrance to the Bay of Kotor was really narrow, somewhat resembling the neck of a bottle. We hadn't decided by then how to continue after Kotor. Should we head for the mountains towards Albania, or rather stay on the coastal roads? Some tourist guides describe the Bay of Kotor as the southernmost fjord in Europe. On the next ferry ride, we learned how small the world can be. We met a family from Freiburg who were exploring the Balkans with their caravan. The route from Lepetane to Kotor was among the most beautiful stages of the entire trip. The scenery was composed of large buildings of Venetian origin, and the surrounding green hills and mountains offered a wonderful ever-changing view. Meanwhile, we were soaking wet, but we couldn't be bothered. After all, the rain was warm. And soon afterwards we could set our eyes on the famous World Heritage Site, the Bay of Kotor. Our plan of climbing up the Serpentines was out of the question. The clouds were hanging so low that it didn't make any sense to choose that option. Instead, we traveled to Budva, where we were happy to see the first Greek coach. By then, we had accomplished over 1,500 kilometers. Our bicycles held up to the tasks, and overall we were quite lucky, up to then. We were aware of that each night. Up to now, we had experienced only a few hours of rain. We were on time, and with Albania, there was only one country left between us and Greece.
Come in. May I have the key? I need a shower. I want to swim.
Why not?
Will you come back to the apartment, guys? See you there.
We approached Albania, presumably the most exciting adventure on our trip. Just a few kilometers before the border, we encountered 3 racing cyclists who overtook us with ease. In the last village before the border, we spotted the 3 bikes leaning against the wall of a bakery. What followed then, you just can't make up. The racing bicycles belonged to a group of elderly gentlemen who promptly invited us to breakfast, which was made up of energy drinks from plastic cups and croissants with sausages. We learned that the group was over 200 years old in summation, and that among them was a true champion, Gavrilo Vukojevic, bicycle road champion of former Yugoslavia in 1962. We were so fascinated of each other that we had to take a group picture. Then we asked if it were okay if we posted the picture on Facebook, only to learn that Bosco, also beyond the age of 60, had already just twittered the photo. Gavrilo and his friends accompanied us to the border. It was great to ride in the company of a real champion. Right on the border, the problems with Alexandros' bicycle came back. He had the first broken spokes fixed in Skoda. However, we had to learn there that one of his wheels had a cracked rim. His bike was a ticking time bomb. It could break any moment. We experienced the whole set of Albanian roads that day. We traveled on main roads, side roads, sand roads, no roads at all, and even on the motorway. The car traffic turned out to be less dangerous than we thought. However, missing manhole covers on the roadside posed as the main threats. There wasn't much traffic in Albania. Once in a while, a Mercedes passed us, and sometimes we came across a turtle. In Fushikoya, I wanted to change some money. A bad idea, because it took ages. Afterwards, Tambet said he could have founded and registered a business in Estonia in the meantime. It was a beautiful day, despite a broken spoke. Albania is fascinating in its own special way, and the Albanian mud stuck on my bike for months. After 190 kilometers, we arrived in the port of Durrës, where we took some rooms in a hotel. From time to time, Tambet and I indulged ourselves in a glass of beer in the evening, while Alexandros stick to water, a lot of water. This was going to be the day on which our ways parted. The crack in the rim of Alexandros' wheel grew larger and larger, and again 2 spokes broke. We drove through Durrës in search of a repair shop. It was a pretty lively city, and surprisingly, there were even cycling tracks. At the train station we discovered old German train wagons, although they didn't look very operational anymore. Our search remained unsuccessful. We couldn't find any suitable bike shop, so Alexandros made a grave decision. He decided to stay in Durrës in order to find a repair shop. We should leave and carry on with the trip. He would follow once the problems with his bike were settled. So Tambet and I continued with our trip, again using the motorway. We got used to the honking of the cars, to the waving kids inside the cars, and to the occasional bumps suddenly appearing on the tarmac. Suddenly, and to our surprise, we met a fellow bike traveler in the middle of nowhere. Christopher, an American tourist, provided us with valuable advice and information for the coming stages of our journey. It was strange that there were only 2 of us on the road now. I was so glad that Tambet was with me, and I am not sure if I would have continued the journey on my own. Anyway, now nothing could stop us, not even the flat tire on Tambet's bike. Stoically, he fixed the puncture right next to a narrow, busy main road. In the meantime, we were still hopeful that Alexandros would catch up with us any time soon. Yet he was about to have his own little odyssey. He couldn't find a suitable bike shop, so he decided to take the ferry to Greece with a little detour to Italy. Albania is an interesting country with incredibly friendly people and quite inexpensive. Unfortunately, there is no sense of environment and nature. Trash just gets thrown away carelessly. How great it would be to rid this rather beautiful country of all the trash lying around. Not an easy task, but one that would be worth it. But I guess, in the end, only time will tell. One of the pieces of advice Christopher gave us was that we should have reached breakfast before heading for the Logara Pass. How right he was. We rode along the coast for the first kilometers, passing a number of picturesque villages. After about 25 kilometers, the long ascent began. It was unusually warm for mid-September. The temperature rose to roughly 20 degrees Celsius before noon. Slowly we climbed the mountain. Tambet drove in front, I followed within eyeshot. 2 weeks earlier, I nearly despaired climbing the Turner in the Black Forest. Now I managed to find my own rhythm driving up to the Logara Pass. Piece by piece and nearly at walking pace, I rode uphill. Long straight passages were alternating with short serpentines. At times it was so steep that I was forced to zigzag my way up. Some of the car drivers were obviously quite impressed when they drove past us. Surely we were the sensation of the day. While Tambet had nearly reached the peak, I was still fighting with the last meters. A group of Italians on their motorbikes came passing by. One of them offered to pull me up to the top, but of course I declined. I had come so far by then, so I was going to accomplish these final meters on my own. The view from the top was breathtaking, the deep blue of the Ionian Sea. You could see the island of Corfu on the horizon. Immediately I had to think of my brother. I am sure he would have liked the ascent. What was he doing right now? Was he okay? Alexandros had taken the night ferry from Durrës to Bari in Italy. There he had to wait for 12 hours for the next ferry to Greece. In the meantime, he finally found a bicycle shop, Ciclospazio, that could take care of his bike and eventually fix it. He boarded the superfast ferry to Igoumenitsa just in time. The descent from the Logara Pass arguably was the most dangerous of the whole journey. Both Tambet and I had problems with our disc brakes by then. Afterwards, the situation didn't actually improve, as my brakes were now grinding and effective pedaling became harder and harder. It was another 100 kilometers before we would reach Igoumenitsa. We were still exhausted from the ride up to the Logara Pass, yet there were still a number of smaller ascents ahead of us. However, the good news from Italy gave us a boost of motivation for the rest of the way. Tambet and I didn't want to spend another night in Albania, although the country became cleaner and tidier the more we went south. Interestingly enough, some Albanian men in Himare were talking in Greek to each other. Neither stray dogs nor the imminent closing of the border for the night could stop us. Finally, we arrived in the port of Igoumenitsa after a tough 185 kilometers and nearly 3,000 meters in altitude. We were in Greece after just 13 days. I was really happy that I made it through the day, and I was so thankful that I had one like Tambet at my side who helped me conquer the Logara Pass. Reunions can be so wonderful. We traveled as a pair for 2 days, now the trio was finally complete again. Before we could continue with our journey, however, I, for a change, had to visit a repair shop. My bike needed new brakes. The first kilometers felt like torture for me. My legs were heavy as lead. The smallest ascents seemed like the Himalayas. I was constantly moaning and groaning. The other two were driving in front, good, so they couldn't hear all of my complaints. In Greece, the tourist season was still in full swing. The picturesque town of Parga was crowded with visitors, so we didn't stay long and carried on towards Preveza. Then the next adventure was coming up. How can we get through the tunnel? The tunnel company told us that we could order a shuttle service through the tunnel. On our way to Preveza, we were riding along the coast and still had some kilometers to go. In Paralia, we couldn't help ourselves. We had to stop. The blue sea, the special Ionian light, and the long, sandy beach, simply irresistible. A little kitten was watching as my brother and I got undressed and jumped into the warm water. It was simply wonderful, how refreshing, and I had this great feeling of having made it to this place with nothing but my own strength. The ordeals of the day before were finally forgotten. Shortly after we could make out a high mountain on the horizon. Discussions ensued, bets were placed, but there was no doubt that was Mount Anos on Kefalonia, the highest mountain of the Ionian Sea. We were so close to our goal. We swiftly rode to Preveza, and indeed, after a short period of waiting, a vehicle with a hangar arrived and transported us through the tunnel. Arguably, the most bicycle-friendly tunnel of the whole trip. Welcome to Greece. 1,000 mosquito bites later, we arrived on Lefkas. It was the final night of our trip. The next day, we were going to reach Kefalonia. After the events in Albania, Alexandros had become more careful. He checked his bike like a pilot during the outside check. And once again, we were lucky. Until the day before, the Greek ferries were on strike. This was the first day they were on service again. The 16 kilometers to Nidri were easy for us to travel. It was the end of September now, but still there was a lot of traffic. We met a group of Polish bicycle tourists on the ferry, as well as some German tourists. Alexandros gave a German tourist some valuable information about Kefalonia, who, in return, invited us to Kassel. Slowly we approached Fiscado on Kefalonia. We were nearly there, only 60 kilometers were left, a joke considering the distance that lay behind us. We wanted to make the trip in 16 days. I hadn't always been sure whether we would be able to do this. After the events during the first days, I had my doubts, and now we did it in only 15 days. Unbelievable. After a souvenir photo in the harbor, we drove through the picturesque fishing village, the only village that hadn't been destroyed in the earthquake of 1953, by the way. Unbelievable that only 30 years ago just a handful of people were living here. Today it is a popular harbor for yachts from all over the world. Even Hollywood stars show up from time to time. We made our way through the crowds of tourists heading south. I enjoyed every meter. I didn't care about the upcoming ascents. I couldn't be bothered at all. I felt free. I had this dream of traveling to my place of birth with nothing but my own strength. When my brother joined in, the whole enterprise became a family thing. Now, this dream had come true. It had been 4 years from the first idea. Half a year of intense preparations. All that paid out now. How glad and thankful I was that my brother had the idea of taking along Tambet. I have no idea what I would have done without him in Albania. The landscape was so beautiful, the village of Ayevthimir below us, the Bay of Sami in the background. Shortly afterwards we could see Myrtos Beach, one of the most famous beaches of Greece, and also one of the most dangerous. I nearly drowned there as a little boy. When we saw the Bay of Agostoli, Tambet said that this surely was the most beautiful day of our trip. There was nothing more to say. When we passed their graveyard, I greeted my father and my grandfather, not with a car horn as usual, but by ringing my bell. Words cannot express how I felt when we arrived at the renovated Debusset Bridge with my cousin Fotis waiting there for us. He had followed our trip on Facebook, just like many others. For years the bridge was closed. The longest stone bridge in Europe had suffered badly from the earthquakes and the countless cars that used to cross it. Today the bridge is open for pedestrians and cyclists only. Now we had only 1.5 kilometers left to the Platea, the city's main square. Agostoli, our place of birth, didn't seem to take any notice of our arrival. Nevertheless, I feel magically attracted to the city. And now I was looking forward for the upcoming week of holidays, the sea and the wonderful beaches, the great food and, of course, my Greek family. We did it, a distance of 2,322 kilometers. We accomplished 20,000 meters in altitude and drove for 165 kilometers on average each day. On some days we were on our bikes for 10 hours or longer. The most important thing, however, was that we arrived in Agostoli safely. We certainly lost 1 or 2 kilograms of weight and my fingers were numb for some time, but that was all. We drove from morning to night in order to stay true to our motto, bike to the roots. What a great time we had. We made it. And to be honest, I would gladly get back on the bike first thing tomorrow.